Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. I think the real key theme for me this afternoon is how are our investments today shaping the future? And without putting the consumer in clear line of sight in everything that we do, are we really going to achieve that additional value? Because the consumer is the only one putting money into the chain. So if we meet or exceed consumer expectations, they're willing to pay for it. And we're asking consumers to pay more than they ever have for our product. And so we can't afford to let them down on quality. So that's really the key theme for me through today's presentation. So what I'm going to take you through is what are those consumer expectations? We'll have a look into the future and see if we can crystal ball what that future looks like and how are we going to get there, as well as where are the investments today and where are we heading with our key program investments around Meat Standards Australia, around objective measurement technology, and then through our livestock genetics investments as well, and we'll bring the whole value chain together. So starting off with the consumer, we really need to understand what those consumer expectations are. And if we look forward to 2025 and we think about what are the expectations of a consumer going forward, well, they're going to be purchasing our product based on a meal outcome. They're looking for an occasion and they're purchasing for that occasion. And they're going to want to know who produced that product, how were those animals raised, where did it come from, and what was the quality of that product, what was its sustainability credentials, what interventions were used in its production, so what were the treatments provided to that animal, for example. So we need to think about how we translate that information through our production system to meet those consumer needs. So when we start looking at our objective carcass measurement technology, and we look at the dual energy X-ray that will give us meat, bone and fat, so we'll have a yield estimate, a yield measurement there prior to animals being boned out. We can then also match the quality and get the balance right between quality and yield. And we'll also then be able to overlay the brand specifications and make a brand promise to a consumer that we've then delivered through having more precision in our yield as well as optimising quality, and then the brands themselves can differentiate their promise and capture that value from the consumer dollar. So we're creating the opportunity through those investments, creating the opportunity for producers to get paid on the value of the livestock that they produce. And then when we actually translate those objective measurements, we also need to improve market specification compliance. One of the biggest costs to our industry are animals that we've cared for the whole lives, and then we send them into the market and they fail to meet the specifications and they cost the industry, the whole value chain, a lot of money. Then when we get into breeding our animals to those market specifications, so we need to get a very good handle on the information that we receive today, because there's more information coming in the future. And one of our challenges is making sure we're packaging that information that is useful and that you can make decisions from that information. So we need to get a handle on what the data is today so that as more information comes, it's less disruptive in your own businesses and you can understand and better connect with your customers and ultimately what the consumer wants. And then DNA testing will become routine and we're going to have cheaper, more affordable, cost-effective genomics. And I guess I'm going to unpack that a little bit more to understand how all that fits together. So then Meat Standards Australia plays a critical role in bringing all of these things together. And in partnership with industry, we developed a 5-year plan in 2015. We're now at the midpoint of that plan. And what we're looking to achieve through that plan is making all Australian beef cattle eligible for MSA grading by 2020. If we can have all animals eligible, it means that if the industry choose to grade them, we can predict the consumer outcome from all cuts from every carcass and appropriately position those cuts to their best end market outcome. And that might be going into a manufacturing box, but it also might be lifting the value of some cuts that are currently undervalued and making sure that we're also segregating our better end product and targeting those consumers who are willing and prepared to pay for it and who will come back and thank us for it. By 2020, we want to be grading 50% of the national adult cattle slaughter. Whilst every animal will be eligible, we're realistic about taking the industry on a journey and increasing the percentage of our production that we grade. We're also making sure that we have the research to underpin our promise to have an eating quality grade for every cut of every carcass graded. so we can appropriately match the fitness for purpose, the best outcome for all cuts. We're working with brand owners to deliver MSA into the trade. The brand owners create value, so we get paid on weight, but quality creates value, and brands themselves can actually differentiate themselves even further through their brand messaging. As brands get closer to consumers, they capture more value. So we're working with brand owners and we're positioning MSA as a quality system. It was never designed as a brand, and we're now working on marketing MSA as a quality system, underpinning brands. So when brands go into international markets, we won't be doing generic advertising of MSA. Will be the trademark, and protecting the integrity of the trademark in international markets is really important. And brand owners making an eating quality promise to whatever market they supply, they can underpin that with the science of MSA, and it's a system that will underpin what they are promising in their brands. The growth of MSA will come from international markets, and I'll talk about the strategies we're implementing to enable that growth to happen in our international markets. We're looking at objective measurement technologies both in the chiller and on farm to give you the tools that you need to improve market spec compliance, give you real-time information, and to manage animals that are both suitable and not suitable for consignment prior to you sending them in and finding out later on through your feedback that they weren't what your customer wanted. So how are we going? How are we tracking against the plan? Well, MSA turns 20 next year, so we've got 20 years now of commercial operation around MSA. And as you can see over the years, the adoption has increased significantly. And the yellow line is the percentage of national adult cattle slaughter over time. So whilst the MSA grading numbers dipped a bit in 16-17, remembering we've come off those record slaughter years, and the 16-17 slaughter numbers around 7 million head, we have actually graded 40% of our national adult cattle slaughter, up from 38% the year before. So the percentage-wise, we're trending in the right direction. But what will create the next level of growth is what I'm going to touch on in a little bit more time. So then from a sheep point of view, we have an MSA program for our sheep meat, and the lambs, we're now grading 25% of our lambs are following that pathway. Of those lambs that are graded, of the 5.7 million lambs that were presented for grading, 70% of those lambs are now being marketed under MSA licensed brands. That's been a significant growth in the volume of lamb now being promoted as MSA into the trade. An objective measurement technology in lamb is really going to help us because we have a cuts-based model ready to go for lamb, but we need an objective measure to measure IMF, intramuscular fat, at chain speed in our lamb plants, and we can deliver a cuts-based model and take out those really top-end cuts and extract more value out of our lamb production. But we need technology to solve that for us. The benefits of producing MSA cattle, we track this over time, and this is a graph that we chart through the National Livestock Reporting Service, and this is comparing MSA YG cattle to non-MSA YG. And I think we'll start to change the way in which we report these numbers, but this is a bit of a health check to say, are the price differentials still there for MSA despite the prices increasing and market volatility? And even in 16-17, there was 23 cents a kilo price differential between MSA and non-MSA in the same category for non-feedlot cattle, and 11 cents a kilo for feedlot cattle. And that was a direct benefit of $130 million just in that 12-month period paid back to producers. But there's a greater opportunity on the horizon, which I'll get to in just a moment. So when we then start looking at what's changing in our industry and what's going to help us drive growth and how we're going to take MSA to the next level, well, the beef language white paper with its 46 recommendations has created the opportunity for our industry to prepare for that future. One of the first outcomes of that review that has been adopted and endorsed by industry has been the inclusion of an eating quality graded cipher in the language. And that's in addition to the language, it doesn't replace any language. However, what it does create is the opportunity for us to pack product based on eating quality before we apply any dentition categories, and dentition doesn't impact on eating quality. We've got over 100,000 consumers who've eaten over 700,000 individual samples of beef that tell us over the last 25 years of research that dentition doesn't impact on eating quality. Now our language enables us to pack on outcome first. So if we look at the scenario of MSA eligible 4 and 6 teeth cattle, that over the last 12 months were consigned and they graded MSA and they met company specifications, there were still price differences, and I'm talking about MSA price differences, for MSA 4-teeth cattle being 5 cents less than the YG and 30 cents a kilo the 6-teeth, and yet the index outcomes would have met those brand specifications. So I ran a scenario and said, just within that 12-month period, what would have been the gross industry benefit if we could have packed that product on outcome first without downgrading those animals? Well, here it is. There's nearly an extra $10 million of value for producers. The processor, brand owner, wholesaler, that middle bit of the supply chain, an extra $16 million. And based on our retail price differentials, there's another $20 million additional at retail. It's close to $50 million of lost opportunity. So what a great incentive for the whole supply chain, the whole industry to get behind it. For us as an MSA team, we're pretty excited about it because we've already got commercial companies who have adopted it. There's product going into international markets being marketed under EQG, and we can reinvigorate the program and engage with those supply chains and work with producers and brand owners to make sure we can evolve our industry very, very quickly. This is a game changer. The other big change in the program has been around the removal of meat colour as an MSA requirement. We're not saying that meat colour isn't important to consumers, but what our research showed was that the colour at grading and the colour at retail changed. Colours tended to get lighter. The colour at grading, and we're measuring that in one muscle, relating to the colour at retail in other muscles is a very poor relationship. But what we continue to show is that pH is a determinant of eating quality. So provided pH is below 5.71, then we're not compromising the consumer in any way. So that's a big game changer. So then the growth within international markets, we've developed guidelines for exporters. MSA is one of only 2 programs outside of the US that is USDA process verified. MSA exporters into the US can use the USDA logo on that product and get recognition from US consumers that that's been endorsed by the USDA. And so we're working with brand owners and we're sub-licensing brands into international markets, and we'll see that growth, and I'll keep a very close eye and report back on that growth over time. I'll quickly move through our objective measurement technologies, and you've heard a lot about DEXA over the last 12 months, and we're making sure that we're also looking at objective measures around eating quality measures. We're looking at hyperspectral cameras that can measure marbling, ribeye area, fat colour, meat colour. Those devices, when they first came out, were around $400,000. They're coming down in price, I think something like $40,000 now for installation. But then there are cheaper devices as well, the NIX colour sensor, which was developed by 2 guys in Canada whose mother was an interior designer, and she wanted something to match paint colours. You can sit this device on a ribeye, it'll give you an instant readout of colour. It's retailing for $500. So the technology is moving very quickly. We're working with Meat Image Japan with their cameras to measure. They're really focused on marbling, but it can do ribeye area, meat colour, fat colour as well. So we can, we've got a range of devices in action. On farm, we're looking at can we measure and identify individual animal responses to stress. So dark cutters, high pH cattle being the biggest cost to our industry. So we're looking at these thermal imaging cameras, and you can see that in this video the eye is less prone to change in ambient temperature, so we can measure the temperature of the eye. You can see where those animals are rubbing against each other, where it's red and hotter. We can measure temperature. We're also looking at devices, similar camera technology, looking at temperature, respiration rate and heart rate. And we've measured these animals, around 800 head on King Island and Tasmania, measured them on farm. We've had some cattle go direct consignment, some mixed. They went across on a boat. Some were rested before slaughter, some straight to slaughter. We replicated that through sale yards, direct consignment, rested after sale yard, direct consignment from sale yard, and took these measures on farm, on boat, sale yard and at plant. All of that product was collected going through consumer sensory testing. We'll have results early next year, and we'll see whether any of those indicators that we found in these animal behaviours give us any insights into being able to identify those individual animals, remove them and manage them separately before we consign them. Wouldn't that be a fantastic outcome? The final section for me is around genetics. We're just now on the 12-month anniversary of forming the National Livestock Genetics Consortium. So to remind you of the priorities of that consortium around world-leading R&D, what we're asking our researchers to do when we're commissioning R&D is that we're setting baselines on what our genetic progress is, and our goals are around doubling the annual rate of genetic gain. We're looking at working with the best minds in the business, and we've got them around the table on the task force. We're looking at disruptive technologies. I've already mentioned cheap genomic tests. We're moving towards, we're asking all project applicants to make their project IP available to contribute to multi-breed analysis. We're looking at cultural change around genetics, how we value genetics. We're looking at, I've just employed an adoption manager for genetics who's not a geneticist. It's a breath of fresh air. He's getting plenty of advice from geneticists, but it's really around proof of profit, positioning genetics in the whole farm system approach, and making sure we're working back and making sure our genetic selection decisions also are improving what we can deliver through to consumers. We're creating the opportunity for industry to have seamless transfer of information. We're asking project IP to go into an accessible data platform. And we're creating the rules around that data access, and that's going to really create opportunities for us to be more collaborative, to work with new partners that we haven't worked with before. When projects are coming together, there's producers, researchers and commercialisers involved in those conversations, and we're working on creating that collaborative environment around genetics going forward. One of the biggest priorities we have at the moment is matching our genetic selection decisions to consumer outcomes. And genomics plays a key role in that, because if we can predict and understand what consumers want and link our slaughter feedback back from commercial animals back in through to the seed stock sector, and we've got our reference populations that are the best well-managed and well-measured animals, it's a bit of a game changer for us. So that might sound like a bit of a pipe dream, but we've got a project that's approved that we're working on getting it contracted at the moment, where if we can genotype 100,000 commercial carcasses with enough decent quality around the management groups and enough information around pedigree and performance, that we can then have enough linkage to the rest of the MSA graded cattle within that year. So it's not that far away. And that's how the Irish got started. So anyway, that's a bit of a snapshot of where we're going. And here we've got the supermarket of the future. So when we start to consider that future that I started, this is actually happening. This is the Co-op supermarket chain, a Danish company that have got over 1,500 supermarkets in Europe. They've developed a concept supermarket which they've recently opened in Milan. Now they're trying to create an experience. They're not wanting people just to come in and shop. They want to connect, and they want to give consumers what they need. So what they've done is, when you walk into the supermarket, above the shelves, they've reorganised the whole supermarket. Above the shelves they have screens. And those screens, when you go and pick up the produce, or you walk over and it tells you where was that product from. In the fresh produce section, you can hold up, I had an image of a lady picked up a bit of fennel and held it up, and it said what pesticides and herbicides and fertilisers were used in the production of that vegetable. And think about that from what do we need around our red meat. Are we going to be in a position in 7 years' time where a consumer can walk in and pick up a piece of red meat in a tray and it tell you who produced it, where was it from, what was the quality, what was its sustainability, what's its footprint, and all of the information that consumers are asking for. So I think that's, and this is a company that, they're really looking at that, expanding that technology. This is the concept store. It's open now, and so if you're travelling in Europe, it might be worth a look. But I think this is really where we're heading with, trying to meet consumer demands into the future. Thanks, Alistair.